Here we go again with another turn of a playthrough of Order and Opportunity. As we record this video, the game is on the P500 pre-order list of the GMT Games. And so the EU is up and we are playing this as a non-player turn just to illustrate how the thing works. And so I should mention this will be the last action phase of the first period. So one period is always 4 rounds long, after which we will move into the globalization phase. And so the next video after this one will be the last one in this series. So I will conclude this playthrough by walking you through the globalization phase. But before we get there, we do the EU turn. So once again, drawing from the development deck, and we get a Black Swan. Select a random pivotal event not yet in play. Resolve it at the end of the next world events step of the globalization phase. Okay, so this is a bit of a random thing to have right at the very end of the period, but we'll see what happens. So so it says select a pivotal event not yet in play, and here on the right in the middle we see the pivotal events track, and we've got the Europe in play but none of the others. So let me just roll a die and see which region we get. So the regions are numbered on the map, so we'll go by that. We're rolling the black die and we get 3, which is Asia. So we will put Asia, the Asia pivotal, into play and basically resolve it very soon as well. So and the Asia pivotal we find over here. So I will place it here onto the map, so that we think about resolving it when it's the time. Right, and so get rid of the Black Swan and move on to the opportunity step. Is the EU in position to resolve anything anywhere? A quick look on the map shows us Central Asia, so this is worth zooming in. So theoretically the EU with 2 levels of political influence is in position to resolve the opportunity in there, but the rule is that if anyone else has as much or more influence, any type of influence in the space, they may decide to block the EU from resolving it. So the US being the partner of the non-player EU, they would not block it, but the neutral white octagon will. So therefore the EU doesn't qualify there. That's an important rule and a dynamic in the game, even when not playing with the non-players. This dynamic and of blocking, being able to block the other player, but also being allowed to lift the block for the purposes of allowing somebody to resolve something. This can be a something that is a weapon for you in negotiations, for an advantage or a favor returned in some other area. Yes, so the non-players do not negotiate in that way. So we will simply move on to the commands phase, and as with the US during the previous turn, we will also do the same thing with the non-player EU and draw 4 cards. Let's drop them onto the map and start going through them one by one. So first one is a political action, and once again we select a region. 6 checks the EU home space, and as it happens, the Brexit talks is a world event. Let me just scroll over there. So Brexit talks is a world event that can be resolved with political influence and with EU political influence only. So this is what the icons and here the resolve conditions tell you. And so EU will certainly try to position themselves to resolve that situation. Are there any reactions? Yes, look, the Chinese, they are in the position to benefit from offshoring, and basically they will simply earn a resource as a result of the reaction. And so that was the first EU action. We move to the second one, which is security action. Once again, we pick a region, and that is 5. So we remember this is the Middle East. Is the EU able to do something here? So this is where things can sometimes get a little bit tricky when you're doing the non-players, which has to do with figuring out what are the spaces that the non-players may select. So, and there are a couple of rules that I'm not going to walk through in detail here, but for instance, Levant being adjacent to the EU by virtue of these labels here would be a legal space for EU to select, but since there's no world event or no an opportunity for them to pursue, they will just simply ignore that. Arabian Peninsula would have something to do with military influence, but unfortunately EU doesn't have access to it. And so we skip from 5 to 1, which is always for the non-players the home space. They can't do anything with. Oh, sorry. They can do something with security action in the home space, namely contest the Chinese influence there. And this they will do when they contest. The following happens: the non-player will pay resources equal to the level of influence they are contesting. This is the same rule in a multiplayer all human game as well. So they will pay 2 resources for contesting the 2 levels of Chinese economic influence there. We will so the battle mechanic, if you like, that we are doing here, the contesting is deterministic. So the level will decrease. There's no doubt about that. But what will also happen is the world order contribution of the contesting power will decline. So the EU slips from 3 to 2, which means that the authoritarian powers which we are controlling in this game, so Russia and China, are exempt from the so-called world order penalty, which is 1 resource, if they hit this lowest level on the world order track. So that penalty would not now apply, since the EU is not upholding the world order themselves. And so with these moves, the EU has now set itself up for resolving the world event, but that will only happen at the start of the next turn. So for the time being, everything is all right from the perspective of the opponents of the EU. And then we play the next card. This is again a military card. We increase. We select a random region, which is 2 Americas. Military influence. Okay, so Venezuela crisis can indeed be resolved by military influence. We can see it over here. And the card Venezuela crisis contains these plus icons down the top left that indicate that as long as this world event is in the space, then those indicated powers will or are allowed to select the space for the purposes of taking actions there. So those plus icons tell us that the blue power, so the US, the yellow one, EU, and green Russians are able to select that space. So this space would actually qualify for the EU to place a military influence. The second thing to look at is, and keep in mind about the EU, is that they don't have their own military influence pieces. They have the NATO pieces, and the placement of NATO pieces happens from the NATO track over here, and it has to respect the rules as detailed here for the current level of the NATO track. So this NATO status level marker shows us that the alliance is doing very good. And NATO influence may be placed into Asia, Middle East, as well as all the lower levels on the NATO track, so Europe and adjacent Africa and Europe. But NATO military influence may not be placed into Americas because the alliance is not solid. So that means the non-player EU is unfortunately not able to and allowed to place into Venezuela. So we skip from 2 to 3. Let me add, as regards these placement rules and the NATO track, these are the same rules in the base game as well, so it's not that we are talking about some sort of complications arising from the non-player here. No, these are things that apply also in the multiplayer game. So Asia, what is the situation there? What can the EU do there in terms of increasing military influence? Well, they can pursue the Taliban, and they will do so, increasing the NATO military influence from 1 to 2 in that space. And let's see, were there any consequences? Any reactions? No, not in Asia. So that was the third EU card, and we've got one more. And it's another security action over there. So once again, we start by selecting a region 2, and that is Americas. Again, we will check that already, not happening. And we skip to 3. It is Asia. And now I have to look into the play aid just to remind myself briefly. What's the deal here with the non-players and the security action? They will place only up to the space's stability value unless playing reaction. So they will not actually place, they will contest in that space. So that's interesting. They will contest against the neutrals because that will render this Taliban a resolvable world event for the EU and the US non-players, as it will also the Central Asia. So same procedure as last time. We pay, or the EU pays resources equal to the level that they're contesting, which is 2. So drop that down to 2. Decrease the neutral influence by 1. And since we are now contesting in a space that is not a home space, we will place 1 tension in there. Well, tension is already at 2 anyway, so, and that's the maximum level it can reach. So nothing happens there, but the last thing to do is, as last time, to decrease the EU world order. It goes down to low, which imposes the penalty onto the EU, and so they lose 1 resource. And that, I believe, is the end of the EU turn, because the planning and the discard and refill phases, or steps rather, they don't occur. So we will end the EU turn there, discard those cards. And yes, so in the next and the final video, we will encounter and go through the globalization phase. So see you there.